turn and bumped him off the puck. Now Hudson feeds it better. Close. Oh, stopped by Rimpinen. Who's puck in front for Higgins as Rimpinen took it away from Nelson.
You're listening to All the Kings Men, the official podcast of the LA Kings.
Here comes Perreault on the breakaway. Perreault in. Oh, save by Rimpinen. An incredible stop on the breakaway try. Now a wraparound. Rimpinen turns that away.
Now, here's your host, Jesse Cohen.
All right, joining us today is Andrew Epps, all the way from Fort Worth, Texas. How are you doing today, Andrew?
I'm good. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for joining me. Now, I pointed out Fort Worth, Texas, because we're here to talk about Finnish hockey, which I'm not going to lie, struck me as a little counterintuitive. So if I'm not mistaken, your Twitter account lists you as, hold on, I'm going to try and get this exactly right. I can't remember if it said obsessed with or an expert in Finnish hockey. Independent scout obsessed with Finnish hockey.
Yes.
So how does somebody in Fort Worth, Texas wind up not just a hockey fan, but a Finnish hockey aficionado?
Yeah, so Texas, DFW as itself is abnormal hockey place, but 93 the Dallas Stars moved down here. My dad was a big hockey fan through the 80s when the Blackhawks had their farm team out here. The Dallas Blackhawks followed through. So in 93 when the Stars came down, Stars did a big push for Madonna was out skating with all the folks, and we were out as kids just becoming big fans. So when we lived out in East Texas, and when I moved to DFW, went to college at UT Arlington and met my wife, who happens to be from Finland.
Oh.
And so connected with my wife there.
Okay.
Father-in-law, very big into hockey, played hockey his whole life. And, the culture over there and, getting into it, you play with a lot of folks and, got kind of, as I met my wife and have been with her for over 10 years, introduced to the culture. Big hockey fan, getting to know all the folks there and going to all the events that they have in DFW. The big joke about Dallas Stars is the Finnish mafia
Right.
here.
Yeah.
And so we've got a big Finnish community here in North Texas as well. Nokia is based in Irving, Texas right now, one of their locations. So big Finnish population. The North Texas American Finnish Guild is here as well. And so there's just a lot of opportunities to be connected with Finland as well. Also in my current job as an engineer, I support Finland as a country. So just have all these micro connections, all starting through my wife. And through that, Esa Lindell comes to Stars, big Jokerit fan, as you see, as I'm wearing my Jokerit jersey right here, and just get more enticed into the Finnish hockey and learning about the culture over there. And, basically just, it was more and more things, building up, and the dam eventually broke that I just started, religiously watching Finnish hockey and getting into the prospects. And, my friends always joke, and they ask me so many questions of like, as I knew more and gave myself accreditation, between my friends, they're asking more and more questions. I was like, I got to start writing this down. And the more I wrote down, the more traction I got. And so I just became the Finland guy over here in Fort Worth, Texas.
I'm not gonna lie. When you were first brought, into my periphery, I was like, okay, sure, a guy in Texas loves Finnish hockey, whatever. Honestly, that's all. Like, I feel way better about all of this now after hearing all of that. When I
It's
first
a ridiculous
saw the thing,
story.
yeah, I was like, well, I don't have a Finland guy, so I was like, all right, I'll give it a shot. But like, I was like, guy in Texas likes Finland. Okay, sure, I like things too. Okay, so we're here to talk about Petteri Rimpinen. And I don't know how much Liga you watch, because there are multiple leagues in Finland. So the first thing that leapt out, and we've talked to Mark Yannetti and Scott Wheeler, and Zach Dooley and I both spoke to Petteri at development camp. We're recording this in the middle of August, so this is now 6 weeks ago that we spoke to him. But he's, he was a kid on, and apologies if I get the pronunciation wrong, please correct me, but Keiko Espoo?
Yeah, Keiko Espoo. Yeah.
The team he was playing on.
Mm-hmm.
He was the goaltender of record for 40 games.
Yeah.
As a 17-year-old, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. Like, so how rare is that? And I know that Finland has a national goaltending system. I don't know what the right word for it is.
Yeah. So
yes, sir. Go ahead.
in Finland, they the big thing about Finnish hockey is the development system through Finland. There's a lot of controversy right now. Is where's the state of Liga right now in adult hockey? Where does it rank in like the top 10 hockey leagues? And there's a lot of pushback. Sweden. But the thing that's kind of main in the development system of Finland is how much their culture is engaged in developing young talent. They have multiple camps that seek out young talent. The national team is deeply involved in young person development, and they even look out at the age 14 level of looking at the birth year of every person and bringing them into camps. And then at 16 they have a camp called Pohjola. And apologies for any of the Finnish speakers. I'm only, minorly, I'm still a Fort Worth Texans, but they have a camp that that is sponsored by the National League. It's actually an HBO series as well, where they every year look at this camp. It's very intense. And they try to look at, the 16U level and picking talent there and getting those kids more involved in the national system and the development system there. So Rimpinen was selected there, taken into that camp. And, this is at 16. He was at time already starting to play in U18 games. And I think it was the Espoo Blues at the time, which was the league that eventually became Kekko Espoo when they kind of had some financial troubles and restructured. But he went to that camp at 16, was showed to be the top goalie at that camp. And there's about 160 kids that attend that camp. I would say probably about, 15 to 20% of those are goalies. And already at that time, he was showing to be one of the best goalies in Finland. And so that kind of continued on as he developed his style, that he kept getting anything that he would attend at the national level, he was getting that best goalie award. And when he was in the U20 league in Kekko Espoo, he was getting voted the best goalie there. When he went off and joined Liga as, and I think he was 17 playing in an adult league, he was getting best rookie of the year. And that's kind of the thing you see over and over with Rimpinen, is he performs in these mature roles as a young person and is competing against adults, with the back and forth of the Liga level. You want to say these young kids are is the adults performing at NHL caliber. And there maybe not be a performing, but these are still adults that have a lot of wisdom and strength. And this is a 17-year-old kid that's getting in the goal, dealing with the faster pace, dealing with a lot of experience, and performing really well. And it's even at 6 foot, he's not, Jake Otter, who's 6'5" in the goal. He's only, at the time when he first started, representing, he was 5'10", 5'11", and he's still filling out that goal, making good saves. His big quality that is he stays really calm under pressure. When it gets really chaotic in front of the goal, he tracks the puck well and measures it out. And now as time goes on, he's still in Liga right now, and he's still tracking the puck well. He's a little bigger at 6 foot, still the same weight, I think in 170, 180 range, but he's still, keeping calm under that pressure and tracking the goal there. So that's the thing you see with the Finnish development system, is they're very involved with their youth. They progress through, and you kind of see him at the top of that goalie league in the Finnish Nationals.
I want to correct myself because I caught something as we were talking about that. I kept saying he was 17, and I think I heard you say it. He's actually 19. He's an overage.
He's 19 right now. Yep.
So I guess the question then is, given all the positives that we have to say about him, how does he pass through 1 year of a draft and become an overager? Is it just that he's 6 foot? Because I have to say, standing next to him, he's slight.
Yeah, he's a small guy. I think that's probably, the NHL tends towards, that's kind of the phase right now, is drafting folks who are a little oversized. And that's kind of the take on him right now, is goalies lean towards that more, Man Goose, who was recently drafted by the Dallas Stars, 6'4". Like I said, Jake Otter, 6'5", Kings goalie, also very, very large, 6'3", 6'4". I think NHL is starting to trend towards those larger goalies. And when he was looked at in 2024, he was only standing 5'11", still 175. And I think that caused a lot of hesitancy in his initial draft in 2024. And so I think they needed some time, some proof over the years. So in 2025, came back, grew a couple inches, was a little bit taller, and was just consistently performing, and then also performing in adult leagues as well, and kind of showing signs of that UC Saros for Nashville. kind of can be a small guy, but very dynamic, can pursue the puck and make these saves. I think just those contingent proofs were the things that the NHL needed to kind of confirm, all right, let's take a risk on this guy. Let's see how they develop and kind of pursue with them.
So I don't want to, try and pass myself off as
No.
knowing anything about Finnish hockey, because obviously I don't. But
Yeah.
in 40 games in Liga,
Mm-hmm.
he finishes with a 2.38 goals against and a 9.11 save percentage. Like,
Yeah.
that seems really good to me.
No, I think it's great. You go back and forth of Finnish hockey is the aggression level. Also bigger rinks in Europe. So there's a lot more space, maybe more time. So that's kind of the proving ground as he transitions. He's got another year left in Liga, 2025, 2026. But the thing you'd want to see on his progression line, timeline is coming to the US or coming to North America. The rink shrinks, people get faster, and he can still track the puck well and defend. So even though the Finnish rinks are a little bigger and maybe the intensity is not as dynamic in Liga, it still is impressive. Like that, those skills, and he shows that when he goes to the World Junior showcase, that he's still performing well against different multitude opponents from different cultures. Playing U.S. opponents, even though it's still on the bigger international rink, he's still tracking and playing well.
So let's talk about the World Juniors, because that's,
Yeah.
in my limited, research into him, that's obviously the that's the feather in the cap, right? He goes to the WJC and he shows out and he earns the nickname Mr. Showtime or whatever it is. And,
Yeah.
although we want to call him Texas Pete because his team was sponsored by Texas Pete, but it sounds like that might not be the case anymore. But anyway, so from your perspective, which is the more important data point? Is it the peak performance in short bursts of, small sample size, high profile tournament play? Or is it the, 4 years of showing up at these camps and being considered the best in his class amongst a already, relatively small sample size of Finnish goaltenders?
I think the good data point right now is what we brought up early on, that he's 19 in Liga playing against these adult players and tracking that above average score. That tracks really well with his development. When you're looking at Finnish prospects and how they're developing at their age, and we'll kind of get this into Chauvin as well, is that they're performing out of their age range. So he was 13, 14 when he joined the U16 team, at the start of that league, and he's always, performing up. They might start him. And that's kind of the benefit of Finnish hockey, is if your U18 doesn't perform well, you can still bump a guy down who's within the age gap down to the lower leagues. But the coaches and the development staff at Kekko Espo are always putting him in the above because he's showing results. And that's what, in the development track that he's seeing right now, they're putting him in Liga. So he gets those adult experiences in the higher leagues and gets to face that wisdom. I think as a goaltender, that's really important to, see what kind of tricks, see the deception, see the chaos. I think that's really important to face those adults rather than the World Juniors where you play people of your age, because you'll see development prospects go through the Finnish systems and they'll play people at that age and they might be performing dynamically, but as soon as they jump to that next age level, they really struggle. So I think for him right now, being in Liga, it's really beneficial for him, and showing those results is encouraging. I think if he, me and Jack Hahn were talking about this, that the sweet spot for staying in Liga before you transition to that North American hockey league, and Jack had worked for Tappara in Tampere. And so he was saying, that 1 or 2 year right now with the current adult system is kind of the sweet spot for development prospects. And so that'll kind of fit the development curve for Rimpinen, is that he'll spend 2 years in Liga, and then you're wanting to start seeing him as a Kings fan transition into the AHL space, facing the North American ice, especially where it's more competitive and more there's more speed there. That's where you'd start to see the jump. And so I think he's following that development curve, and his experience in Liga right now, that's more important than his showings in World Junior. But World Junior right now, and him getting all the accolades as best goalie, that's only cherry on top as well.
Andrew Epps, thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, appreciate it.
The next prospect we're going to talk about, drafted in the 5th round, 152nd overall, Petteri Rimpinen. He's a goalie. Mark, when there's only so many goalie spots available for prospects to take, and the Kings already have Carter George and Hampton Slokinski, how good is there a baseline minimum that a goalie has to be in order to even get considered being taken when you have that many goalie prospects?
Yeah, I mean, like when you look at Rimpinen, as I said, we skipped over him once, actually twice, and Roots was going crazy. I was pretty sure we were going to get Rimpinen with the pick we took him with. It was a executive decision, or whatever you want to say it. If it went bad, that's on me 100%. No one else. I take the bullet for that, especially with how much Roots liked him. But he was one tier away from the guys that went ahead of him. And as I said, I don't mind skipping a tier. Uh, one tier, he was in a layer with another guy. So, it was a little bit of finesse and nuance there, but it also helped that my projections said that we would get him with the pick we did. But again, you need to have some elite attributes. I mean, his skating, his skating borders on elite. His quickness is elite. He
All right,
has
now
the.
you paused, so I'm going to take an opportunity to ask you the same question I did the first time we tried to record this conversation. When it comes to a goalie and skating, what kind of skating are we talking about? Why does it have to be? Why is it helpful to be elite? Because when I hear somebody say skating, I think of either point to point skating, like face off dot to corner, or one zone to the other. The goaltender obviously doesn't have to move a ton. So what kind of skating are we talking about? Why does it have to be good?
A goaltender does have to move a ton. I mean, a goaltender might move 5 or 6 times, um, adjusting before the shot's even taken. Like, again, it's relative too. Like, if you're a 6 foot goalie or below, well, then skating is as important an element as there is in the book. If you're 6'4", it's certainly less important. But it's, as I said, being able to move as a goalie. In the NHL, you see it. Goals are scored when you get a goalie to move. You see the lateral passes in the power play. You see you see that. I forget if it's 77 or 78% of goals are scored, making a goalie move laterally. So skating's important. And when you get to the undersized guys like Rimpinen, it's even more. He has to hit his marks. He has to anticipate. He has to get out a little further. If you're a 6'4" guy and you drop to your knees in the paint, you cover a lot of net. And I'm talking now with angles. Like, the angles are different. A guy has to shoot it differently to get it over your shoulder when you're 6'4" on the butterfly in the paint than if you're 6 foot. So Rimpinen has to get out. He has to get out a foot higher, sometimes 2 feet further, sometimes 3 feet further, depending on where the shot's coming, to create that same presentation angle, that illusion of coverage. Like if you had one of those diagrams that had like the shutter frames where it was like click 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 click, and there was like 5 things, and you went from a 6 foot goalie to a 6'4" goalie, and you saw their coverage angle. The 6 foot goalie would have to be in the top of the paint where the crease ends, and the big guy could be at the back of the paint, almost where the goal line is, for that same coverage angle. So a goalie skating for Rimpinen is probably the difference between life and death. He needs it to compensate for his size, the quickness too, the ability to recover. So again, now you're talking about, you've made a hard skating move to your left, and now you got to immediately get back to your right. So you need to get that dig in your edge and then explode back to your right where a big guy can reach. So the skating for Rimpinen is, and the quickness, the athletic ability, they're fruit of the same tree. Although I've seen athletic goalies that don't skate well, and I've seen very good skating goalies that aren't athletic. It's very rare. They usually complement each other. But those three attributes, the skating, the quickness, and the athletic ability for Rimpinen, are the difference between him making it and not making it. And they might even not be good enough. As I said, not a lot of 6 foot and sub 6 foot goalies in the league. You're looking, Saros is that benchmark. It's not easy to do. So he needs to be elite in those areas, and we thought he was.
I know you don't draft players off of a stat line, but as I look at this guy's page, like, I just can't think of anyone recently who did what he did. Like an 18-year-old goalie in Liga, played 40 games on a decent team, really good splits. Like, how rare is the season that he had at 18 years old?
It's extremely rare. And again, he didn't go in the league of being the starting goalie. He won the job. He took the job. He took him to the playoffs. You saw what he did. I mean, everybody saw what he did in the World Juniors. I mean, he had some. He won some of those games for him. He almost beat the U.S. He had them. He certainly had them stressed out. Um, but those matter too. I mean, you want a goalie who's a winner. You want a goalie who has that it factor. He certainly seems to have it. He performs better in bigger games, in bigger stages, in harder competition. So, the stat lines like that, they certainly matter to a degree.
We Zach and I both had a chance to chat with him after one of the scrimmages at Dev Camp, and both came away with the same observation, which is that he might be one of the most well-spoken young men we've had a chance to talk to. And I think the first time Zach and I talked about it, he added the qualification of best well-spoken amongst European prospects, and I just said, heck, he's better spoken than some of the North American kids, right? Even though English isn't his first language. You mentioned the it factor. Does that, confidence is not really the right word I want to use, but that comfort in his own skin that comes through when you're talking to him, and obviously has to be there in order to have some of those performances in the World Juniors, does that come through in the draft process and the interview process?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a whole lot of things that go into the it factor. I mean, you could be, you could be a dick and still have the it factor.
Sure.
Like there's a whole lot of things that go into the it factor. There's not a one size fits all, but there are a lot of things that you see. You see that natural leadership, like confidence could be it. You just said it. His comfort level, like you see that when he plays. Like when things are going wrong, you know, he's still comfortable. His demeanor doesn't change. In a big moment, he doesn't get rattled. He doesn't get too hyped up. He doesn't get too competitive. So that when you talk to a guy, especially goalies, it's hard to quantify. It's more of a, I can't describe it, but I know it when I see it, and all those things go into it. The fact that he's so mature at that age, that's something. I mean, you don't get to be that comfortable, that mature, without success, without if he was playing J18 and he was 0-7, you're not going to see that type of kid. So a lot of that goes into the foundation of becoming that, getting that it factor. He seems to have it. But again, unless you have it in the NHL, it's different. It's hard to find the it factor anywhere. And then as you go up in levels, it's even harder to find. And then when you get to the highest level, now it's the hardest to find.
Because these drafts are happening before the new CBA takes place, none of these players have your dream scenario of the standardized rights timeline. So when it comes to goaltenders, because there's only so many goalie spots available, runway and timeline, I imagine, has to be part of the equation. If you're drafting defensemen or forwards, you go, all right, well, we'll draft 1,000 forwards, and the ones that make it, and the ones that don't. But if you're taking a 19-year-old goalie and you already have an 18-year-old goalie, a 19-year-old goalie, and a 24-year-old goalie in the pipeline, is there any attention paid to potential outcomes, timelines, runways, whatever you want to call it? Who he'll be competing with for space and time within the organization?
Well, yeah, I mean, he knows who he's competing with. They're probably not competing with Portillo just because of the age distribution.
Sure.
They may eventually be competing with Portillo, but that would be strictly for an NHL job. So he probably ages out of the competition circle, at least for now. But these guys know. I mean, there's three of them. They're a similar age. They're competing with each other. It's something that's in the back of your mind. The timeline, the fact that there's only two spots in the American League and only two spots in the NHL. So things get crowded very quickly. That being said, when I've said it before, I think, from well, you can pick the date, but let's just say from 2010 until 2017-ish, 16-ish, we had the best goaltending depth in the NHL. And as I said, I can remember sitting down with Freddie Anderson and talking about drafting him, and he's like, "Well, I won't come." And Roots is there, and I'm like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "You guys shouldn't draft me." And I'm taken aback, and he's like, I wouldn't go. I forget if it was, I think it was Carolina who originally drafted him, and he goes, "I wouldn't go when they had Cam Ward. I'm certainly not going to go when you have Quick and Jones and and all these guys." And so we had that kind of goaltending depth, and then within 3 years we had the bottom goaltending depth in the league. So it's a lesson. I'm not sure. We certainly could have been a little bit better. It would have, as I said, some of it played against us. We could have maybe muted some of the damage of not having that, of it going from high to low, maybe kept it not from bottoming out so much, but it's, as I said, it's just an area. It's an area, as I said, it can change really quickly. So there came a point with this pick, as I said, we weren't going to take him with the Harrington pick. And we weren't going to take him with the Bart. Well, you know what? This is it. This is the pick. You can't pass over him. You can't. This is where his talent. This is where the talent, the player, the depth of the draft, and the depth of our position all merge to where this is. You can't overlook it anymore. This is where he has to be taken.
The next pick we're going to talk about, taken in the 5th round, 152nd overall, Petteri Rimpinen. And this one is more fascinating to me, Scott, because of the pre-existing depth in the organization at the goaltender position than it is necessarily of Rimpinen as a pick. A 5th round pick spent on a goalie, however good his resume might be, it's not that alarm. It's not really going to raise my eyebrows. But because the Kings have Slukinski and George already in the pipeline, not to mention Portillo, to bring in a 4th goalie, then you start looking into his performance at the WJC. Then Zach and I both had a chance to talk to him, and he's a very impressive young man just in one-on-one conversations. And suddenly you start to think, well, gosh, if they were willing to crowd an already crowded runway, there must be something there.
Yeah, and Rimpinen, again, another overager, right?
Mm-hmm.
A kid who was passed up. He's a 6-foot goalie. You guys, if you've talked to him, you will have noticed that he doesn't have the Eric Portillo size.
No, he does not.
But Rimpinen had a very, very, very good year. And when you have a very good year and you put up good numbers at a pro level, which he did in Liga last season, and you play like he did for your national team and a good national team at the World Juniors, frankly, I thought he carried that team, and they obviously got, for those who don't remember, last year in Ottawa, the Finns lost to the Team USA in the gold medal game. They got a silver medal. Rimpinen was their starting goalie. Big deal for them. Full marks to him and them for the way he played in that tournament. He was arguably the biggest reason that they were in that game. And then it starts to add up when you've had a strong pro season and you've played like he did at that level. You start to maybe look past the size. They also looked past the size when they drafted 6'1" Hampton Slukinski at the time. Hampton's now 6'2", and when they drafted 6' Carter George at the time, right? So clearly not, despite having Portillo, who's 6'5", they're clearly not all that concerned about the size of their goalies. There are a lot of teams nowadays that just want the 6'3", 6'4", 6'5" goalies, and they steer clear of goalies who are smaller than that. But increasingly, I think there are enough goalies that have bucked that trend. And UC Saros is the one that everybody always uses. But, I mean, we just saw what Dustin Wolf did in the NHL last year as one of the Calder front runners. Jack Ivankovic, who was the second-round pick of the Nashville Predators this year, is a 5'11.5" goalie. Devin Levi, who hasn't quite established himself as an NHL goalie with the Buffalo Sabres, won 2 Mike Richter awards, and in college hockey as the top goalie in college hockey as a 5'11" goalie, although I think they list him at a generous 6 feet. So there are success stories that are coming, and Rimpinen, whether he becomes that kind of a success story and a bona fide NHL goalie is one thing, but I think at minimum he adds depth to your organization. He can stay in Finland for a little bit. He can come over once you know what you have in Carter George and Hampton Skorkinski, maybe if one of those guys makes it and one of those guys doesn't, then Rimpinen is in some kind of an AHL tandem with the other one. There's suddenly very good organizational depth, and you can never in today's world have too many goalies. Most teams are playing 4 or 5 goalies over the course of an NHL season due to injuries. It's something that you cannot do without, and they've now got obviously 4 young goalies who are legit prospects. Now Portillo's getting on to the mid-20s in terms of age now, and I think that's when you start to stop calling him a prospect. But certainly with Skorkinski and George and Rimpinen, you've got 3 good young goalies. I would say he's the third in terms of a projection. He would certainly be third from that group. George and Skorkinski are one of the best goalies in the OHL and one of the best goalies in college hockey, respectively. And I think that, given their age and their track record, is more impressive than what Rimpinen accomplished last year. But what Rimpinen accomplished last year was real, and it was enough that even as a 6-foot goalie, that he deserved to get picked.
He fascinates me because I feel like, and tell me if I'm overstating or over-exaggerating here, you don't see very many 18-year-old kids playing 40 games in Liga as a starter, and if they do, not posting as good of splits as he did. Like, how rare is that to see? I know he was an overage pick, but he was still 18 for most of the season. Like, I don't know, I just feel like you don't see that very often.
Yeah, it's not super rare, but it's certainly not common. It's not an every year thing that we see that. There have been a pretty consistent flow of good goalies to come through Liga. Nicholas Coco, who's a prospect of the Seattle Kraken and is going to play with the Coachella Valley Firebirds in the AHL next year, again next year. Traveled that path, and there are others. I could give you a long list, but it's hard to do, especially at that age. And there are good goalies in the NHL right now who didn't do that. Levi Merilainen, who had to come over and play in the OHL with the Kingston Frontenacs, is a recent example of that. Levi couldn't break in at that age to Liga, and if he had been able to break in at that age to Liga and have that kind of season and really establish himself as a good goalie in Liga at 18 years old, then he wouldn't have come over and played in the OHL with the Kingston Frontenacs. And Levi Merilainen had an excellent sort of introduction to the NHL last year, and was one of the bright stories of the NHL season last year for the Ottawa Senators. So it's a real level. It's a real accomplishment when you're a goalie at an early age in any pro level, because it just takes goalies longer typically to climb the ranks and to perform at those levels. Liga has taken a bit of a hit over the last several years as a level. There was a time when it was not comparable to the KHL or SHL, but wasn't viewed as a clear cut below those levels. It is now a clear cut below those levels and much more comparable to the Swiss NLA or the Czech Extraliga or the DEL in Germany. Teams in Finland are now struggling to keep up financially with teams in Switzerland and in Germany, the top teams in Switzerland and Germany, because there isn't a ton of money in Liga these days. Several teams that are on pretty dire straits financially in Liga these days. So that has hurt the league and the quality of the league. But I don't think that diminishes what Rimpinen accomplished last year, considering his age.
At the time that we're recording this, we have not yet spoken to Mark Yannetti about the picks made by the LA Kings, but I heard him on a different platform talking about Rimpinen, and Mark has a very aggressive way of speaking, let's just say. And he was essentially saying that the only thing that Rimpinen has working against him is that he's not 6'2" or 6'3". Now, I'm sure that that's not necessarily true, but I trust that what Mark means is that the largest drawback against Rimpinen is his height. Does it even matter anymore? Like, I can't remember, Scott, if you and I had ever spoken about it, but there's a skills coach that I used to have on all the time, and he was talking about the fact that he believes that goalies will begin to get shorter as shooters, as stick technology improves and shots become, more different and forwards get better at hiding release points, the goalies will have to get closer to the ice to track shots coming in. So, I mean, does the myth of the tall goalie still, is it still that important?
I do think there is some truth to that. I've been a steady proponent of the little guy goalie, if you will. I was very, very high on Dustin Wolf. Dustin Wolf was taken in the 7th round. I had him as my second ranked goalie that year behind Spencer Knight, who was obviously a first round pick. I was a huge fan of Jack Ivankovic this year and of Petr Andrianov in Russia, who was a first round pick of the Columbus Blue Jackets at 20th overall and a bit of a surprise for some people at 20th overall. I think you can do it. I don't think it's the be all and end all. NHL shooters will pick holes if there are holes in the net. So that's where NHL teams are operating from, is there are naturally more holes. And if there aren't more holes for smaller goalies, it's because they're playing at sort of further out of their net. They're playing more challenging and aggressive angles. And then if they're not elite athletes, guys will beat them laterally. They'll get caught on backdoor plays. That's the fear for the sort of drafting a lot of smaller goalies. The argument I would make is that increasingly bigger goalies, to the point of your scouting coach, increasingly bigger goalies are getting beat along the ice. A lot of them struggle 5-hole. The NHL players can find a way and a weakness to expose in just about any goalie, including, as we've seen in the playoffs over the last couple of years, the best goalie on the planet in Connor Hellebuyck. So I think it's a fool's errand, if you will, to try to chase one specific thing with goalies. I think they're the hardest position to evaluate and project as is. And even the best goalies in the NHL have bad years. Andrei Vasilevsky had a bad year a couple of years ago. Sergei Bobrovsky has infamously had multiple bad years over the course of his career. And Sergei Bobrovsky is going to be in the Hockey Hall of Fame. And Andrei Vasilevsky is going to be in the Hockey Hall of Fame. And Connor Hellebuyck, despite a lack of playoff success, is now, with his MVP and his multiple Vezinas, going to be in the Hockey Hall of Fame because of it. So I think your focus should be on, do they or do they not stop the puck? And are there major inhibitors in them doing that? I don't think being 6 foot is one of them. In fact, I would probably argue that the 6'5", 6'6" goalies have just as many sort of projection issues as the smaller goalies, in terms of things that are naturally going to become hard for them at the NHL level. I think the same is true of big, tall forwards. There's a reason, despite all the talk of how hard it is to be successful in the NHL as a 5'8", 5'9" forward, there's a reason that there aren't all of the bigger players in the NHL these days are defensemen and not forwards as well. It's just harder to handle the puck when you're 6'6", 6'7". The Protas brothers in Washington maybe being a bit of an exception to that rule over the last couple of years. But the hockey players come in all shapes and sizes, and I would include goalies in that.